You ever notice how the universe has a way of whispering to us when we're too busy pretending everything's fine? Subtle signs, little nudges, warnings that skim past our awareness until one day they hit you like a thunderclap. Funny, isn't it? How we walk around thinking we see clearly, thinking we understand, thinking nothing could ever surprise us until the message arrives. A warning from heaven about your sister. Those words sound dramatic, almost like something out of a story you'd laugh at if it happened to someone else. But the truth is, messages like this rarely come wrapped in fireworks. They come quietly, insidiously, the kind you almost miss because you're too distracted by the noise of life. And the moment you ignore it, even for a second, that's the moment danger starts creeping closer without announcement. You've seen it before, how people close their eyes to what's right in front of them, how they brush aside intuition, dismiss gut feelings, ignore the subtle signs that scream louder than any words ever could. And sometimes, the warnings aren't for you, they're for someone you love, someone whose life intersects with yours in ways that matter more than you realize. This isn't about fear-mongering, it's about attention, awareness. The kind of focus that separates those who survive from those who look back and wonder how everything went wrong without seeing it coming. Because the universe doesn't send messages for entertainment. It sends them as a chance, a fleeting, fragile, crucial chance to act before the consequences arrive. And what happens when the warning is about someone you can't protect by ignoring it? That's where it gets tricky, uncomfortable, necessary. It forces you to see, to feel, to engage, to step into responsibility you weren't ready for. It forces you to confront the reality that love sometimes demands action, vigilance, and courage before it's too late. The thing about warnings from above, or however you choose to name them, is that they rarely repeat. They appear once, subtle, persistent, almost fragile, and if you dismiss them, the opportunity to prevent disaster may vanish quietly, leaving only regret. And that's the cruel beauty of it. The message is given, the chance is offered, and it's up to you whether you see it, whether you act on it, or whether you close your eyes and pretend it doesn't exist. You ever notice how life whispers when it's trying to tell you something important, but we're so distracted we barely hear it? The universe has this strange, subtle way of nudging us, dropping breadcrumbs that most people walk right past, convinced nothing could possibly be serious until it's too late. A warning doesn't always come with flashing lights or sirens. It's quiet, almost invisible, tucked in a feeling you can't name, a coincidence that hits a little too perfectly, a shiver that runs down your spine when you least expect it. And most people ignore it because listening requires courage, and ignoring it feels comfortable, safe, like pretending you're in control. Think about the moments you've brushed off your intuition, the times you felt a tight knot in your chest, a fleeting thought, an uneasy glance. And instead of exploring it, you shrugged and told yourself, asterisk, I'm overthinking it. Asterisk, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the trap. Life doesn't scream at you. It whispers, and those whispers are easy to dismiss, but they're there for a reason. Every time you ignore a whisper, you're choosing the comfort of ignorance over the danger of awareness. And in some cases, that choice isn't just about you. It's about someone you love. A warning from heaven, or however you choose to frame it, is never meaningless. It's an urgent message disguised in subtlety, a chance to act before chaos shows up at your door. And the cruel irony is that it often comes when your mind is too busy, too skeptical, too certain that you understand everything already. That's the moment when you're most vulnerable, when you could easily overlook what matters most. Life has a way of testing whether you're paying attention, whether you care enough to notice the signs that don't fit neatly into your daily patterns. And let's be honest, these warnings aren't convenient. They show up at awkward times. They show up when you're tired, distracted, or overwhelmed. They show up when you're making plans for your life and you're not thinking about anyone else's. But the message doesn't wait for your schedule. The urgency isn't dictated by your calendar. It exists because the stakes are high, because the consequences of ignoring it aren't abstract, they're real, they're tangible, they can change lives, and sometimes they can even save a life. The problem is that most people treat these nudges like suggestions rather than mandates. They assume there will always be another chance, another warning, another opportunity to get it right. But life isn't patient. Life doesn't give repeat performances. Those whispers, those uneasy feelings, those moments of intuition, they often appear only once in a way that matters. Ignore them, and the universe moves on. The moment passes, and what you didn't notice quietly becomes something irreversible. Your sister, the person this warning is about, doesn't have a voice in this message. She might not even realize the danger herself. That makes your attention critical. You're the one who can act on the signs, who can respond, who can protect, who can notice what she might miss. But action requires awareness. Action requires that you stop brushing aside the subtle signals, that you stop convincing yourself you're overreacting, that you start listening to that inner voice that's been trying to get your attention before it's too late. It's strange how easy it is to live in denial when ignoring a warning feels safer. Denial is comfortable. Denial allows you to sleep at night without feeling the weight of responsibility. Denial lets you pretend everything is fine until it's not. But the cost of denial is steep. Every ignored whisper carries the risk of consequences that you can't predict, that you may never be able to reverse. And the cruel part is that the more you ignore, the louder the consequences get once they finally arrive, because by then they've grown out of control while you were looking the other way. We spend so much of our lives training ourselves to avoid discomfort, to avoid responsibility, to avoid fear. But life doesn't work that way. The warnings, the subtle messages, the signs, they're uncomfortable for a reason. They're designed to make you notice, to make you act, to make you confront reality before it's too late. And ignoring them doesn't make you safe. Ignoring them doesn't protect anyone. Ignoring them is surrendering to chance, leaving the outcome to randomness, leaving your sister vulnerable to whatever the universe is trying to prevent. And that's why attention matters more than ever. Awareness isn't optional. Listening isn't optional. Recognizing what's right in front of you, even if it's inconvenient or frightening, is the difference between catastrophe and prevention. Every whisper carries meaning. Every uneasy feeling is a signal. Every subtle sign is a message from something bigger than yourself. And choosing to ignore it isn't just a mistake. It's a risk, a gamble, a decision to leave fate unchecked while the clock ticks quietly, relentlessly, waiting for someone to finally pay attention. You ever notice how most people think warnings are supposed to be loud, dramatic, impossible to ignore? They expect flashing lights, alarms, sirens. And when life doesn't deliver in that way, they shrug and move on, convinced nothing serious is happening, convinced the danger isn't real. That's the trap. Warnings don't always come with fanfare. Sometimes they arrive in whispers, in fleeting gut feelings, in coincidences that seem almost too subtle to matter. And most of the time, people miss them because they're distracted, because comfort is easier than awareness, because acknowledging a warning forces action, and action is terrifying. When it comes to someone you care about like your sister, this subtlety can be deadly. You've seen it before. Signs that seemed minor at the moment, small hints that you didn't notice, overlooked signals that later turned into crises. And the funny thing is, life doesn't wait for you to catch up. The warnings arrive, quietly but persistently, and the longer you ignore them, the more powerful the consequences become. You convince yourself that intuition is imagination, that gut feelings are paranoia, that coincidences are random. But what if they're not? What if they're the universe bending its voice toward you, trying to get your attention before it's too late? Think about the moments you've brushed off that uneasy feeling, the times you've dismissed a warning as trivial. Maybe it was a call you didn't make, a text you ignored, a small incident you rationalized away. Each of those moments is a decision. Every time you ignore the subtle alerts, you're gambling with something far bigger than your comfort. You're gambling with someone else's safety, someone who trusts you, someone who depends on you to notice, to act, to care when the world is too distracted to step in. And isn't that the cruel part? Most people want certainty. They want the warning to scream, to leave no room for doubt, to demand immediate attention. But life doesn't work that way. Life is patient in its own twisted fashion. Life gives you these tiny nudges, these whispers, these hints that test whether you're paying attention, whether you're aware, whether you're willing to risk discomfort for the sake of something bigger than yourself. Ignoring them feels safe, but it isn't. Ignoring them is surrender. Every ignored warning quietly compounds, like cracks forming in a structure you can't see. They start small, barely noticeable, and yet they grow in strength, in consequence, in inevitability. By the time you finally realize the danger, it's no longer a warning, it's a crisis. And suddenly, those moments you brushed off as insignificant take on a haunting clarity. The universe spoke, and you didn't listen. And now the price of ignorance is impossible to ignore. Fear makes ignoring warnings easy. Fear convinces you to wait, to delay, to pretend you don't see it. Fear tells you that you're overreacting, that it's nothing, that it will pass. And yet fear is exactly why you must act. Fear exists for a reason. It's the signal that something matters, that something is at stake, that your attention is required before it's too late. But comfort always wins in the short term. Comfort whispers, asterisk, ignore it. It's easier. It won't matter. Asterisk. And while you listen to comfort, life unfolds without pause, without mercy, without forgiveness. Protecting someone else requires vigilance. Protecting someone you love requires awareness that goes beyond convenience. It requires listening to intuition even when it feels irrational. It requires recognizing that subtle signs, fleeting messages, and uneasy feelings are not random. They're signals pointing you toward action, pointing you toward responsibility, pointing you toward the choices that might make the difference between harm and safety. Most people never realize how fragile this balance is until the moment of crisis hits. They never understand that ignoring a warning doesn't neutralize it, it amplifies it. The universe doesn't lose patience, it simply keeps moving. And the consequences of your inaction accumulate silently, invisibly, relentlessly. And when the moment finally arrives that proves the importance of what you ignored, the realization is devastating. The danger was real, the warning was real, and the responsibility was yours all along. So every whisper matters. Every subtle feeling, every uneasy glance, every faint hint is an opportunity to act before disaster strikes. Dismissing them is tempting because action is uncomfortable, responsibility is heavy, and fear is frightening. But ignoring them is far more dangerous, because in the end, the world doesn't send repeated warnings, and the quiet message you brushed aside may be the one you'll wish you had heard when it's too late to change anything. You ever notice how people act like warnings are optional, like they're suggestions you can ignore until it's convenient? Funny thing about warnings, they're rarely convenient. They show up at the wrong time, in the wrong place, in the wrong mood. They come when you're tired, distracted, or convinced that nothing serious is happening. And because they're subtle, most people treat them like noise, background static that doesn't need attention. But ignoring them isn't harmless. It's dangerous, especially when the warning isn't about you, when it's about someone you love, someone you care for, someone whose life you're quietly responsible for without even realizing it. Think about the last time you ignored a gut feeling, that little voice that said, asterisk, pay attention, asterisk, that tiny knot in your stomach, that instinctive hesitation you brushed off. You told yourself it was overthinking, that you were imagining things, that everything would be fine. But intuition doesn't lie. Those subtle nudges, those quiet signals, they exist for a reason. They're the universe's way of giving you a chance to act before it's too late. And ignoring them is like walking past a red light at full speed. You're pretending it won't matter until it does. The problem is that humans are wired to dismiss what makes them uncomfortable. Warnings are uncomfortable. They force you to pay attention. They force you to consider possibilities you'd rather not face. They make you confront your own limitations and the reality that you don't control everything, no matter how hard you pretend you do. And so, it's easier to scroll past, shrug off, rationalize, distract yourself, keep living as if nothing matters, as if the quiet nudges don't carry consequences, as if the universe isn't whispering at you with every coincidence, every uneasy feeling, every fleeting sense that something is off. Now imagine the person the warning is about: your sister, someone you love, someone who trusts you to notice what she cannot. She may not see it. She may not even feel the danger. She might be going through life blissfully unaware, completely reliant on you to observe the subtle shifts, the tiny signals, the faint cries that are invisible unless someone is paying attention. And you have a choice. Every day, every moment, every action or inaction decides whether you step in or look away, whether you respond or ignore. And here's the cruel truth. Ignoring subtle signs is a luxury you cannot afford. Every hesitation, every dismissal, every rationalization builds invisibly, quietly, until suddenly the consequences arrive and you cannot escape them. Life doesn't give repeats. The universe doesn't rewind for convenience. Those whispers, those fleeting instincts, those quiet nudges, they often come only once in the way that matters. And if you choose comfort over awareness, the chance disappears without fanfare, without warning, without mercy. Fear makes it easy to ignore warnings. Fear convinces you that the worst-case scenario is impossible, that you're overreacting, that you can safely pretend the signals don't exist. But fear is exactly why you must act. Fear is a compass pointing you toward danger, toward responsibility, toward the action you're reluctant to take. Ignoring it doesn't make you safe, it makes you vulnerable. It makes the ones you care about vulnerable. And the world doesn't pause while you wrestle with comfort, convenience, or denial. Most people don't realize how fragile life really is until it's too late. They don't see how quickly small signals can turn into irreversible events, how subtle messages can be the difference between safety and disaster, between regret and relief. And the worst part? The person you ignore the warning for the person you care about cannot act for themselves. That responsibility, whether you acknowledge it or not, falls on your shoulders, quietly, relentlessly, and it will not wait. Attention is not optional. Awareness is not optional. Recognizing what's right in front of you, even when it's uncomfortable, inconvenient, or frightening, is the difference between catastrophe and prevention. Every uneasy feeling, every small gut instinct, every subtle coincidence is a call to action, a chance to step in before it's too late. Ignoring them isn't neutral. It isn't harmless. It's choosing inaction over responsibility, comfort over vigilance, and pretending you can control what you cannot, while the consequences quietly grow. And that's why it's so important to listen, to watch, to act. Because the moment you finally realize what you've ignored doesn't come with a warning, it comes with consequences. The signals were there, subtle, persistent, waiting for you to pay attention. And now the lesson arrives not as advice, but as reality, showing you what happens when quiet warnings are dismissed, and how fragile the lives we care about truly are. You ever notice how people treat warnings like optional suggestions, like polite hints that can be ignored until it's convenient? Funny thing is, they're not optional. They're urgent, subtle, yes, but relentless in their own quiet way. Life doesn't announce danger with fireworks, not usually. It whispers, it nudges, it slips messages into coincidences, uneasy feelings, gut instincts that are easy to dismiss. And most people do dismiss them. They ignore the whispers because attention is uncomfortable, because responsibility is heavy, because the truth is terrifying. When it comes to someone you love, someone like your sister, ignoring those whispers is far more than a small mistake. It's a risk. It's a choice with consequences that ripple outward in ways you can't predict. You've seen it happen, haven't you? A missed sign, a brushed-off feeling, a moment you told yourself didn't matter, and suddenly the results are catastrophic, and it's too late to undo. Those quiet moments are not neutral. Every time you ignore a warning, you let life slip past without your influence, and the consequences grow while you remain oblivious, convinced that nothing serious is happening. The danger of subtle warnings is that they're easy to rationalize away. Asterisk, it's nothing. Asterisk, asterisk, I'm overthinking. Asterisk, asterisk, it will be fine. Asterisk, the mind loves these excuses because they protect us from discomfort, from fear, from action. But comfort is deceptive. Comfort doesn't protect. Comfort allows inattention. Comfort lets life happen around you while you do nothing. And when the consequences arrive, they are neither subtle nor forgiving. What you once ignored becomes undeniable, and the realization that it was preventable hits like a hammer. Warnings are rarely convenient. They appear at moments when you're distracted, when you're tired, when you want to ignore responsibility. They show up in ways that challenge your routines, your sense of control, your perception of safety. And the cruel part is that their subtlety makes ignoring them feel harmless. But harmlessness is an illusion. Every time you skip a message, dismiss a feeling, or rationalize a warning, the stakes grow higher. Every small act of inattention compounds, quietly building toward consequences that will eventually demand your full awareness, whether you're ready or not. Fear is the companion of hesitation. Fear convinces you that the warning is irrelevant, that the worst-case scenario is impossible, that acting would be overreacting. And fear is effective because it's invisible until it's too late. But fear is also proof that the warning matters. The discomfort you feel is the universe's way of demanding attention, of asking you to act when action is difficult, inconvenient, or frightening. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. Ignoring it only delays the inevitable while giving consequences more time to grow. Your sister, the person this warning is about, may not see the danger herself. She may be blissfully unaware, relying entirely on you to recognize the signs, to act when the subtle messages demand intervention. That's the responsibility of awareness. That's the weight of care. Ignoring it doesn't shield her. Ignoring it doesn't protect her. It leaves her exposed, vulnerable to forces she cannot anticipate. And all because you chose comfort over vigilance, ignorance over action. Most people never realize the power of subtle warnings until the moment they cannot be ignored. The tiny nudges, the uneasy feelings, the coincidences, if ignored, become undeniable events, consequences that cannot be reversed. And that's when people start to understand that the universe speaks, that intuition matters, that ignoring it is a gamble far too dangerous to take. Because life rarely gives repeats, and the whispers you brushed aside may be the only chance you ever get. Attention is not a luxury. Awareness is not a suggestion. Listening to subtle warnings is a responsibility, a demand from life itself that you act before it's too late. Every uneasy feeling, every fleeting sign, every quiet whisper is an opportunity to intervene, to prevent harm, to influence the outcome. Ignoring them isn't neutral. It isn't harmless. It is a choice that shapes consequences long before they become visible, long before the moment arrives when you realize what you failed to see. And that's why vigilance matters more than convenience. Responsibility matters more than comfort. Listening, truly listening, is the difference between disaster and prevention, between regret and relief, between the life you hope for and the consequences you fear. The quiet signals are always there, waiting for you to act, waiting for you to notice, waiting for you to accept the uncomfortable truth that ignoring them isn't safe, it's dangerous, and sometimes the cost of ignoring them is greater than you could ever imagine. You ever notice how most people treat warnings as optional extras? Like life is some buffet where you can pick and choose what matters and what doesn't. Funny thing is, warnings aren't optional. They're urgent, subtle, yes, often easy to dismiss, but they carry weight far beyond what we want to admit. They arrive disguised as gut feelings, fleeting coincidences, uneasy intuitions that don't shout but whisper, and yet we scroll past them, shrug them off, convince ourselves that comfort is safer than action. When it comes to someone you care about, like your sister, the stakes are higher than your comfort zone. Ignoring a warning about someone else isn't just a minor oversight, it's a decision with consequences that ripple outward. Every small hesitation, every ignored intuition, every rationalized thought that it doesn't matter quietly compounds into a risk you may never reverse. The danger isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It seeps in, silent, unnoticed, waiting for a moment when your ignorance will collide with reality in a way that cannot be undone. The irony is that the warnings are never convenient. They appear at awkward times, in inconvenient moments, when you're tired, distracted, or unwilling to face the discomfort of responsibility. They show up quietly, in subtle nudges that test your attention, your awareness, your willingness to engage when it would be easier to look away. And we look away. We convince ourselves we're overreacting. We rationalize that we can wait. We postpone action. Meanwhile, the messages keep arriving, quietly insisting that you act before the consequences grow beyond control. Most people ignore the signals because fear tells them it's safer to do nothing. Fear convinces you that the signs are irrelevant, that the worst-case scenario is unlikely, that your intuition is exaggerating. Fear is powerful because it disguises itself as reason, as logic, as prudence. But that's the trick. The very discomfort you feel is proof that the warning matters. Ignoring it doesn't make danger disappear. It only makes it stronger while you pretend you're safe. And the longer you wait, the higher the stakes become, until suddenly the consequences can no longer be ignored. Think about your sister, someone you love and want to protect. She may not see the danger. She may be blissfully unaware, completely reliant on someone else to notice the signs, to take action, to intervene when subtle messages demand it. And that someone is you. Ignoring a warning isn't passive, it's a choice to leave her exposed, vulnerable to forces she cannot anticipate, and every moment you hesitate adds weight to the risk. The world doesn't pause while you deliberate. It doesn't wait until you feel ready. And every skipped message, every rationalized feeling, every postponed action is another layer of consequence, silently building. The real tragedy is that people often don't realize the importance of subtle warnings until it's too late. Those tiny nudges, those fleeting intuitions, those quiet coincidences, they often appear only once in a way that matters. Miss them, and the universe doesn't repeat itself. The signals vanish, leaving only the aftermath, the consequences of inaction, the haunting understanding that you could have prevented something but chose not to notice. And that's when the weight of responsibility becomes impossible to ignore. Attention isn't optional. Awareness isn't optional. Listening to subtle warnings is more than good judgment. It's a responsibility, a duty, a call to act before it's too late. Every uneasy feeling, every gut instinct, every fleeting signal is a chance to prevent harm, to influence an outcome, to intervene in a moment that could change everything. Ignoring them isn't neutral. It isn't harmless. It's a decision with consequences, a choice that quietly shapes reality long before it becomes obvious. And yet, people cling to comfort. They cling to ignorance. They tell themselves that waiting is safer, that hesitation is neutral, that denial shields them. But comfort is deceptive. Denial doesn't protect anyone. It only delays the inevitable confrontation with reality, allowing subtle threats to grow unseen until they're unmanageable. The longer you ignore, the higher the stakes become, and the heavier the consequences weigh when the moment arrives that proves what you've neglected. That's why vigilance matters more than convenience. Responsibility outweighs comfort. Awareness surpasses denial. Listening, truly listening, is the difference between regret and relief, between catastrophe and prevention, between a life defined by carelessness and a life defined by action. Every quiet warning, every subtle intuition, every fleeting nudge from the universe is a chance to act, a chance to intervene, a chance to protect, and ignoring them is the slowest, most insidious way to lose control over the outcomes you care about most. You ever notice how the people who care about you the most are often the ones you fail to see? It's funny, isn't it? How someone can be quietly watching, patiently waiting, endlessly attentive, and you walk through life completely oblivious, convinced that nobody notices, that nobody cares, that love only shouts when it's real. And meanwhile, someone has been observing every detail, remembering every word, admiring the parts of you you think are hidden, valuing the things you dismiss as flaws or quirks, and you don't even realize it. Love isn't always obvious. It doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes it's subtle, quiet, invisible to the world, because it doesn't need validation. Someone could be memorizing your habits, your moods, the patterns of your silence, the little things you try to hide, and they care anyway. They see the way you protect yourself with humor, the way you hide pain behind routine, the tiny signs of struggle you think nobody notices, and they see it all as something to cherish rather than to judge. But the danger is that you don't see it. You've been hurt before. You've been disappointed. You've been trained to expect betrayal or neglect. And so when someone shows care without conditions, without expectations, without drama, it doesn't fit into the story you've learned to believe. Your mind whispers, "It can't be real. It won't last. It's probably a trick." And so you look away, ignore the subtle acts, misinterpret patience for indifference, sincerity for weakness. You treat love like it must be loud, aggressive, dramatic, or else it doesn't count, forgetting that the quietest devotion is often the most enduring. And isn't that the cruelest irony? We spend our lives seeking intensity, chaos, validation, because that feels alive, urgent, and worth noticing. Meanwhile, the steady, quiet love that truly sees us waits patiently, almost invisible, hoping we will notice before it slips away. The patience itself is a test. It asks whether we can slow down, whether we can open our eyes, whether we can recognize authenticity without needing fireworks or proof. The quiet observer is dangerous because they demand nothing, yet they ask for your awareness in return, and awareness is harder than we like to admit.